Hello. All right, everybody. Happy Friday. So, week 10. I told myself I was going to stop saying so, but I've already said it twice. So, week 10 COVID reflections from this week, obviously. Not really good news, but just I think something to share that a lot of people in education and related to education are thinking about. Two updates. We want to talk about. One, funding and budget cuts to school districts, particularly large school districts, and then just operating next year come the fall. So many states, cities, school districts are facing drastic just budget shortfalls, and because of that, budget cuts because so many businesses are closed. People aren't spending as much money as normal. So there's not a tax base to kind of generate a lot of the funds that go to these school districts. And so because of that, states are looking at 20, 30, 40 billion dollar shortfalls based upon the states. And because that state and the way schools are funded are having shortfalls, and there's just less money to be sent to school districts within that state. And so when we talk about school districts already being underfunded pre-COVID, this situation is only going to make it worse outside of staffing teachers and staffing positions and additional resources that are going to be needed in response to COVID. So that's a very real challenge that there's not really a lot of solutions unless the federal government, and really only the federal government, can kind of provide any additional funds to help that, because most businesses, even the Fortune 10 companies, won't be able to kind of offset that deficit. And so because of that, and now part two, in relation to the CDC guidelines, if you saw those coming out, which we'll link below, is essentially that, schools would be under an enormous amount of pressure now to make sure they're clean and that COVID is not contracted during school. And the CDC released a few guidelines that kind of recommend a number of things, but just things that are going to be really difficult for already cash-strapped school districts to do. So like one being one student per seat on a school bus. Well, we know many school districts don't have enough school buses, or if they do, they're kind of at capacity, and those buses are already full. And so to require students to only sit on one seat per kid is just going to be really tough. The school desks will need to be 6 feet apart inside classrooms next year. And if many of you know that have worked in or went to large public schools, that's just not feasible, and there's not a lot of extra space happening in schools, or a lot of extra space to even use those at the same time. And then just the amount of kind of like hand sanitizing that will need to take place. And then just little things around like cafeteria, where kids are going to sit, how they'll eat, and being dispersed throughout the school. So some very real challenges I think that will create some opportunities around how schools are designed. Perhaps the school day as well. So kids may be looking to go in shifts. And so half the school will go from, let's say, 7 a.m. to 1 p.m. And then the next half will come from 2 p.m. to 8 p.m. So I think that's going to be a very real solution to make sure all districts are kind of adhering to the guidelines, the CDC recommended guidelines, and to make sure students and families are safe. So just two things we want to share with you from what we're talking about with leaders across the country this week is how districts are going to respond to this budget shortfall, number one. And then number two, like how they're going to adhere to CDC guidelines. It's going to be really tough. It's going to take a lot of kind of community partners and a lot of good organizations working together to help schools and districts respond quickly, because they're not going to be able to do it themselves. And we'll take the business community to help offset some additional costs as well that the school districts won't be able to support by themselves, as they're kind of waiting for state and federal governments to support. So I said so again. Not a lot of rosy updates, but those are just going to be very real situations and challenges moving forward into August as large school districts think about opening. Hope that's helpful. We'll come back next week to share kind of updates to that and some other things as well, and we'll share the CDC guidelines and a few interesting articles we've read from across the country to give you more insight to kind of what we're talking about. Hope that helps, guys. Keep the questions and thoughts coming, and we'll be in touch throughout the week. Thank you.